And the first speaker is Dr. Marcy Darnovsky. She is Executive Director at the Center for Genetics and Society, a nonprofit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area that works to bring perspectives grounded in social justice, human rights, and health equity to considerations of human genetic and assisted reproductive technologies. She speaks and writes widely on the societal implications of human biotechnologies. Today, her talk is Human Gene Editing is for Treating Patients, Not Designing Babies. Dr. Darnovsky, the floor is yours. If you would like to put on your video, wonderful. Thank you so much. Please.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this important project, and thank you for organizing it. And I'm going to now share my screen. Okay, well, this is the Chinese researcher that Katarina mentioned, He Jiankui. And until a few years ago, Dr. He was a biology professor in Shenzhen, China, and he was the founder of several biotech companies. And as Katarina said, in November 2018, he made a very startling announcement at a high-profile conference in Hong Kong. He told the hundreds of people, scientists and journalists gathered there, that he had used the powerful gene editing tool called CRISPR to create the world's first genetically modified babies. Now, the term designer baby or CRISPR baby refers to a child who would develop from an embryo or from sperm or egg that had been genetically altered. The changes would affect every cell in that child's body and would be passed to all their children and all their children's children. And that process, as you probably know, is often called heritable genome editing or sometimes human germline modification. And all this was hypothetical until the birth of the twins, Lulu and Nana. But the prospect has not gone unnoticed. In fact, that prospect of controlling the genes and the traits of future generations has actually been a matter of debate for decades. Since the 1990s, 70 countries have actually debated this at a high enough level and that they have decided to prohibit heritable genome editing with a law or some other mechanism that has the force of law. In Europe, for example, 29 nations have signed and ratified a binding treaty that bans heritable genome editing. A few countries, including some key countries, including the United States, do not have clear-cut laws against it, but they do have regulations or guidelines that rule it out. But in spite of this, when He Jiankui revealed his designer baby experiment, he expected that he would be hailed as a hero. He had already made a YouTube boasting about what he'd done. He'd set up email addresses for Lulu and Nana to handle the fan mail he anticipated. He thought he would be in line for a Nobel Prize, but instead he was widely and harshly condemned. Observers around the world pointed to numerous appalling violations of basic medical ethics that he had committed. And one example among many is the consent form that he gave to the baby's parents, which described his reckless experiment as being like a vaccine. Scientists also identified serious problems in the technical results that he presented at this conference in Hong Kong. And the bottom line is that of these problems, technical problems, is that the changes in the embryos that became Lulu and Nana were actually different from what had been intended. And as a result, their genomes are unlike any that have previously existed, and what that will mean for their future health, no one knows even several years later now. Dr. He was soon fired from his university job. The Chinese government suspended his research. He and 2 associates were given prison terms, and he has just been released actually this past spring after spending 3 years behind bars. But back in 2018, at this gene editing conference, a funny thing happened. The conference organizers did join in on the denunciations, the worldwide denunciations, but then they made a sudden pivot and they moved from condemning He to proclaiming support for heritable genome editing. What they said was this, in quotes, "It is time to define a rigorous, responsible translational pathway toward clinical trials." So in other words, they told the world that this guy, He, he's the bad apple, but we are responsible experts and we can give designer babies a green light. And that is pretty much where the debate still sits some years later. So on one side of this controversy are those who agree with the 70 countries that ban heritable genome editing. And for most of us who hold that view, it would be wonderful if scientists could figure out how to use gene editing for safe, effective, and affordable, accessible therapies that would treat people who are sick, so to treat patients. But gene editing for reproduction, to alter the genes and traits of future children, that should remain off limits, at least for now, and perhaps for always. Many prominent scientists hold this view, along with many physicians, biotech industry figures, bioethicists, scholars, and public interests and social justice advocates, like my organization, the Center for Genetics and Society. But there are scientists and others who are eager to proceed with heritable genome editing, including most of the organizers of that Hong Kong meeting and of another upcoming international summit that's scheduled for this coming March in London. These proponents have been at work mapping out how heritable genome editing should move forward, and they're skipping right over the question of whether it should be done at all. The public and policy conversations about heritable genome editing have been a bit muted since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, but the controversy is now heating up again. And though all sides say that broad and inclusive public participation is needed, the debate is unfortunately still mostly shaped by and dominated by scientists. And that's a real problem, since this is a question that will affect all of us in the way it's resolved. If heritable genome editing takes hold, it will really have a deep mark on the future prospects and possibilities of social fairness and inclusion, and could reshape what it means to be human. And there's another problem. Many of the discussions and the media accounts of heritable genome editing that you'll encounter actually have serious gaps and distortions that make it hard to understand what's at stake. So now I want to very briefly mention 3 points that I think are worth looking out for. 3 questions to keep in mind as you reach your own assessment about whether the future we hope for should have a place in it for CRISPR babies. So first, when you're reading an article or listening to a discussion about human gene editing, think about whether it's being made clear whether the topic is, on the one hand, treating patients, or on the other, altering embryos to create genetically modified babies. When this distinction is left muddy, as it often is, it can sound as if opposing CRISPR babies means giving up on hopes for gene therapies, and that is just not the case. The second point that needs to be clear is this. If the goal is to avoid passing on serious diseases that really cause suffering and limit life to a very, very short time, these are conditions that we may agree should not be passed on to children if it can be avoided. But there's no need to mess around with the genes of future children in order to do that. 100% of parents who carry a risk of passing on such a disease can avoid it by using donated sperm or eggs. And if it's important to them that their child be genetically related to both, they can do that too in very nearly every case with a well-established embryo screening and selection technique. Now, it's very important to understand that screening and selecting embryos is not an ethics-free kind of thing. It raises thorny questions about what kinds of people we will welcome into the world and how we'll treat people who are ill or people who are differently abled. But embryo screening is less ethically fraught and far safer than manipulating the genes of future children. So when you hear that gene editing is needed to save babies from terrible inherited diseases, as you will hear, know that this is more than a bit misleading. Now, the third key point to watch out for is whether physical risks are the only kind that are mentioned in the debate. Of course, health and safety are very important, and the risk that gene editing would introduce harms to the resulting child is substantial. But we also need to carefully consider the dangerous societal consequences if heritable genome editing were to be permitted and to take hold. And let's face it, if it's permitted at all, it's very likely to spread widely. Efforts to allow CRISPR babies only in limited circumstances, however well-intentioned those who recommend that, couldn't be expected to hold, either in policy or in practice. And it's not hard to imagine what would happen next. Fertility clinics would begin to market genetic upgrades to parents affluent enough to afford them. And for the fertility industry, this would be a whole new customer base. For parents, it would be a whole new area of peer pressure. The ad copy writes itself. Don't you want the best for your child to be? But remember, you must act now before you get pregnant. And then what? Well, let's take a look at how designer babies have been imagined in our culture. So I'm going to show you now a few magazine covers. Here's one from Time. Here's MIT Technology Review. Here we have the image you saw before. This is a cover of The Economist. Here's Cosmos. And here is Time once more on the future of babies. So I hope you've noticed what all these babies share in common. Their fair skin, their blonde hair, their blue eyes. Now, I want to be clear that the genetic components, even of hair, eye, and skin color, are complex. And that's far more true of traits like athleticism or intelligence. No one really believes that you can get a high IQ baby or a Stephen Curry baby by tweaking a few genes. But that has not stopped scientists on the techno-enthusiastic side of the question from publicizing lists of genes that they already foresee targeting. And it may not stop those fertility clinic ads from being persuasive. And that's because just the perception that gene-edited kids would be superior could jumpstart the market. And these kinds of perceptions do matter. We know from the sordid histories of racism and eugenics that ugly social disparities and discrimination can be fueled by false beliefs that some of us are biologically fitter or better than others. So I don't think I've made any secret that my view is there's no good reason to develop heritable genome editing and no good reason to run its huge risks. In my view and that of many others, unless we want to build a future divided into genetic haves and genetic have-nots, we should agree to keep that door shut. Thank you so much.